brother was on the Bunker Hill. Ship got hit by 2 kamikazes. 500 guys died. How can they do that? Fly themselves into a ship?
Emperor's God. Duty to God.
I think America had never before faced this kind of fanatical enemy. Young American boys who went to the Pacific were dumbfounded and shocked at the tenacity, the ferocity of the Japanese enemy that they faced.
The Japanese had a very strong belief in Bushido, death before dishonor, and they didn't respect a soldier that surrendered.
This is what made Japan unique, that would bring dishonor to yourself, to your family, to surrender, rather than being taken prisoner and supposed to commit suicide.
The emperor is a god, and you're taught and trained from the time you're 8 years old. That's what you do as a young man. You fight to the death.
They were dedicated totally to their cause, and that's because they fought by the code of Bushido.
What Japan was seeking in going to war was to secure an empire throughout all of East Asia, an empire that would be self-sufficient, an empire that would permit Japan to defend itself against all comers, now and forever.
We know that Japan is willing to risk war to have the economic empire it desires. Roosevelt, however, wanted to avoid a war in the Pacific. He told his Secretary of State Hull, one war at a time.
The Japanese, looking at America at the time of Pearl Harbor, said, America's really fractured and fragmented. You know, we can strike a decisive blow that will crack their morale.
Pearl Harbor gets us into a war, an attack on American territory. It turns a European conflict into a true world war.
Japan would be facing enemies who would have far more population and far more industrial power than they would. How could they win under such circumstances? Well, Japanese leaders believed that the one trump card they had was what they called Japanese spirit.
Why was there any hope that a country as small as Japan could take on a big country such as the United States? Well, they said there's one thing that Japan does have, which U.S. does not have: the emperorship, social cohesiveness and order, sense of unity.
The Japanese were socialized to think of themselves as a single unit. So this is the propaganda, and it basically says 100 million hearts beating as one.
You can remember a Japanese soldier running at us, full tilt. We fired into him so many shells, we must have hit him 60 times. But he kept coming, he didn't stop. And then he got to about 40 or 50 feet from us and collapsed. It was amazing that this man was actually dead on his feet, but something just kept him going.
The Japanese had a different tactic in fighting. With overwhelming strength, they would attack our lines. And it was very hard to fight that kind of a battle. But that incurred great losses on the side of the Japanese.
When the Japanese fight, they say, Ten no Heika Banzai, you know, long live the emperor. But they're always thinking about family. I'm dying for my native place. I must die to defend my family.
100 against 1,200. They're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid.
The concept of the Japanese soldier, it was as though war was being taken on against this race of other beings.
The Japanese were seen as grossly inferior, caricatured as having Coke bottle eyeglasses and being incapable of inventing or developing anything themselves, as copycats.
There's a portrayal of them as monkeys, rats, pillagers, rapists, and barbarians.
And the Japanese looked at the Americans the same way, and they said, oh, these people are apes, and they're ignorant, and they have no honor, and they have no courage.
The Japanese were master propagandists, and the enemy is basically a demon or a devil. That is the major image of the Anglo-American powers.
And they feel that their race, the Yamato race, has a destiny to fulfill, a right to conquer.
Teachers told us that Japan is a very special country because of this unbroken line of imperial successions, and the emperor was divine.
The Japanese believed that, in contrast to the purity of their bloodline that they'd maintained for thousands of years, the Americans had befouled their bloodlines by becoming a mongrel nation.
Those stereotypes make killing easier because I'm shooting beasts, I'm killing monkeys, I'm killing demons, I'm exterminating the brutes and the ogres and the devils.
Japs fighting for their own turf now. Every damn foot we go south, they'll get meaner and meaner.
The Japanese soldiers, they were trained in what I would call a culture of cruelty. It was common for Japanese commanders to beat senselessly their own troops. And they're taught that to surrender is ignominious. So if you take a prisoner, you're taking a soft, materialistic American who's not willing to die for his country.
Japanese culture was without mercy, without compassion. The Japanese would kill you even if they were wounded. And the corpsman went to help the wounded Japanese. They would kill the corpsman with a grenade. You soon learned with the Japanese that you had to meet brutality with brutality.
In that environment, it was easy for some Marines, and some soldiers for that matter, to succumb to behavior whose brutality revolts to this very day.
Out of the way, Hirohito. Move! Shoot him! Sit down.
The motivations of the Marines that went, they weren't necessarily there to do the right thing. They were, but they were also there to take vengeance, to get retribution.
And there's this feeling that the Japanese are fighting in an inhuman fashion, and we've got to fight in the same way, to defeat them.
The Marines quickly became every bit as brutal as the Japanese, or more so. They would just shoot them again and again to be sure they were dead. You could not trust them.
This fury built up in you. What's the matter with these people? Their military code is such that they're not going to give up.
Here was a country that was defeated. They can't win. So you have an enemy that has lost but won't surrender and will fight with even greater desperation.
American Marines, as well as soldiers, had begun to ask themselves whether ending the war with Japan would literally involve killing every last man, woman, and child in Japan.
The Japanese were dying in the tens and tens and tens of thousands, but the Americans were taking enormous casualties also that were unacceptable by our standards. We couldn't continue to go on. That's why we push for the air raids and for the nuclear weapons.
Hair used to come up on the back of my neck when I was around Japanese for a long time after the war. And somewhere up about 1970-something, I softened up a whole lot. Those guys were doing like we were doing, what they had to, I guess.
That feeling toward Japanese stayed with me for many years. I've calmed down on that a lot, But I have a different feeling towards civilians than I did the soldiers. I never hated them.
There was no sense of animosity, and the Americans didn't behave as if they had been the winners and they're going to look down upon the Japanese and whether they're going to enslave the country or anything like that. MacArthur stressed stability, and he also insisted on the importance of reforming the country.
It's a war of extraordinary hatred. But when the war ends, that hatred disappears, and the people who were being socialized to think of each other as beasts on the one hand and ogres and demons on the other, suddenly are able to work together and even to move into respect for each other and real deep friendships in some cases. You just step back and you say, this was madness, this war.